Hey guys, what's up? Pastor Matt here. Thanks for checking into this channel. If you're new here, my name is Matthew Everhard. I'm the pastor of Gospel Fellowship PCA. We're a Reformed Bible-believing church just north of Pittsburgh here in Western Pennsylvania. Hey, I don't know if you knew this, but this week is the 300th anniversary of Jonathan Edwards's composition of his famous resolutions. The resolutions, there are 70 of them, and the first 35 or so of them he wrote 300 years ago this week. So I have a book on this. It's called Holy Living, Jonathan Edwards' 70 Resolutions for Living the Christian Life. And Hendrickson, the publisher, wants to give away a couple of those copies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a little competition here and on my Instagram as well. And basically, if you say a nice compliment or something like that about this video or Jonathan Edwards, or actually you can be mean to, whatever, I will pick somebody in the comments and I will reply, and we'll arrange it so that you can give me your address, and then we'll have Hendrickson send you a free copy of this. So there's going to be one winner for the YouTube video competition. There's going to be one winner from the Instagram as well. Can't do it for everybody. Wish we could. A couple of rules, though. First of all, you have 2 weeks from the time of the publication of this video. Second rule, you have to live within the continental United States. So I am so sorry to all my friends on the Samoan Islands and New Zealand and Ecuador and wherever else you may be watching in the world. You got to live in the continental United States in order to win this. But what we're going to do here in this video is we are going to read together my recent article from Desiring God. So this is going to fit in my series of audio articles that I have here on YouTube. And this one recently came out called 300 Years of Holy Resolve, the Enduring Resolutions of Jonathan Edwards. So all that about the competition for the free book aside, I write this. It was exactly 300 years ago today. On the frigid night of December 18th, 1722, the teenager dipped his quill in his ink jar and began to write. He probably cupped his hands toward the warm lantern for a moment first, just to make his fingers more agile in the chilly air, and then he began to compose. Jonathan Edwards was just 74 days past his 19th birthday when he wrote the first batch of his famous resolutions. His brain was swirling with holy ambition. Edwards had completed his graduate coursework at Yale in May and had desired to enter into the public ministry just as his father, Timothy Edwards, and grandfather, Solomon Stoddard, had done before him. Just a few months earlier, in August of 1722, the younger Edwards had arrived in New York City 150 years before any skyscrapers were built to preach his first series of sermons. By all accounts, those sermons were excellent. Edwards had been called to New York to attempt to pastor a Presbyterian congregation that had recently experienced a church split. In the bustling port city, Edwards had found success in preaching his earliest sermonic orations, as well as finding true friendship and spiritual companionship in the home of his host family. His heart was alive and his spirit was on fire for Christ. He was ready to commit his whole life, as well as his eternal soul, to the service of God. His quill carefully drew out the first few lines of ink on the page. Number 1, resolved, that I will do whatever I think to be most to God's glory and my own good, profit, and pleasure, and the whole duration of my time, without any consideration of the time, whether now or never, so many myriads of ages hence. That night, in a steady hand and in the same color of ink, Edwards wrote out the first 35 of his resolutions. He would add several more that week and then continue the practice of adding new resolutions for the better part of the winter. As the calendar flipped from 1722 to 1723, Edwards had written nearly 40 such resolutions. Number 7, resolve never to do anything which I should be afraid to do if it were the last hour of my life. Number 18, resolve to live so at all times as I think best in my devout frames, and when I have clearest notions of things of the gospel in another world. 42, resolved frequently to renew the dedication of myself to God, which I made at my baptism, which I solemnly renewed when I was received into the communion of the church, and which I have solemnly remade this 12th day of January, 1722-23. Spiritual ecstasy and discouragement. Edwards would later look back on this period as the most beautiful experience of his personal sanctification. His faith was growing so quickly that he could practically chart the progress. In fact, that is exactly what he tried to do. Each time he wrote out new resolutions, he marked his progress along the same lines in his diary. The two documents, the diary and the resolutions, would have a symbiotic relationship. As he yearned for holiness and found himself wanting, he would make new resolutions and then monitor his actual progress in his personal journal, keeping track of his successes and failures along the way. One time, however, Edwards found that his failures were far more in number and of a more serious kind than he had feared. January 20th, Sabbath day, at night. The last week I was sunk so low that I fear it will be a long time ere I shall be recovered. I fell exceedingly low in the weekly accounts. I find my heart so deceitful that I am almost discouraged from making any more resolutions. Wherein have I been negligent in the past week, and how could I have done better to help the dreadful low estate in which I am sunk? As the spring turned to summer, existential questions began to threaten his spiritual tranquility, and he began to experience trepidations and palpitations of heart related to the defense of his master's thesis, his quaestio, and the looming necessity of securing a full-time pastoral call. That, in addition to coping with the heartache of falling in love with a younger, beautiful girl, Sarah. As it turned out, these first 40 or so resolutions wouldn't be enough to buoy his soul as he dealt with these somewhat typical coming-of-age strains on heart and mind. His soul ached and his temptations raged against him, so he wrote more resolutions. When the heat of the summer of 1723 was at its peak and the honeybees began to feast upon the goldenrod and sedum plants, Edwards had written a full complement of 70 resolutions. And then suddenly, as abruptly as he had started, he stopped. He never wrote another resolution again. Resolutions as inspiration. There is no doubt that the resolutions are inspiring. This is why they have been printed over and over again, published in the genre of classical devotional materials. Men and women for generations have felt they have met Edwards personally in this short tract-length document, resonating with the emerging pastor's soul-deep yearning for Christ. How can we not be inspired when we read such resolutions? Number 52. I frequently hear persons in old age say how they would live if they were to live their lives over again, resolved that I will live just so as I can think I shall wish I had done, supposing I live to old age. 53, resolved to improve every opportunity when I'm in the best and happiest frame of mind to cast and venture my soul on the Lord Jesus Christ, to trust and confide in him and consecrate myself wholly to him, that from this I may have assurance of my safety, knowing that I confide in my Redeemer. But what so many readers, including the present writer, find so profound and awe-inspiring from the pen of the forthcoming prodigy, Edwards felt as a burden on his soul. The more he resolved, the more he failed himself and his God. He couldn't live up to his own standards. He simply could not will himself to breathe the thin air of spiritual Zion all the time, dwelling long on the mountain of God's holy presence. Since his resolutions pointed out his own sin as much as they pointed toward his own faithfulness, Edwards needed to find another way forward before his resolve fled away with the retreating summer sunlight. Looking outward. Some Edwards scholars believe that he quit writing his resolutions on August 17th of 1723 because his canon was complete with the round biblical number of 70. I think this conjecture is somewhat plausible, but I also think there's more to it. My own studies of Edwards's personal writings have led me to conclude that he simply could not bear the pressures of his own heightened determinations. When taken alone, the resolutions are a powerful document indeed, and even rightly inspiring. But when reading the diary alongside the resolutions as synchronous and complementary documents, it seems that Edwards was building up spiritual pressures that his own soul was not able to withstand. The process of continually grading himself on paper may have become more than he could tolerate. Such periods of deep self-evaluation, when most honest, only proved that Edwards needed more and more grace. In other words, he could not live up to his own standards. To resolve was one thing, but to depend and rely upon Christ was another. And so Edwards grew in his understanding of the daily necessity of dependence upon divine grace as superior to determination and resolution alone. Along with this deepening understanding of his own sin and God's grace, Edwards simply got busier and had less time to gaze in the spiritual mirror of his resolutions and diary. His responsibilities in the church grew significantly when he was ordained to serve under Solomon Stoddard, and then again when he eventually became the solo pastor of the Northampton Church, one of the most significant congregations in the region. He did end up marrying the beautiful young woman he fell in love with as a teen. They had a large number of children, even by 18th century standards, 11. Edwards became preoccupied with preaching innumerable sermons, writing treatises, drafting letters, meeting with other ministers, and counseling his people's distraught souls. He found that he was simultaneously growing as a believer, as a husband, as a father, and as a pastor. And God was at work too in amazing ways that far transcended his own inward fascinations. A true revival began to occur, first in Northampton, 1735, and then all across the colonies, 1740 to 42. Edwards had less occasion and opportunity to stew anxiously inwardly, even as it became more apparent that God was working outwardly all around him. This change in focus seems to me to be evidence of his spiritual maturity rather than any loss of devotion. Relentless reliance. At about age 40, a more mature Edwards could look back upon his 19-year-old self and write, "My longings after God and holiness were much increased. Pure and humble, holy and heavenly Christianity appeared exceedingly amiable to me. I felt in me a burning desire to be in everything a complete Christian and conform to the blessed image of Christ, and that I might live in all things according to the pure, sweet, and blessed rules of the gospel. I had an eager thirsting after progress in these things. My longings after it put me upon pursuing and pressing after them. It was my continual strife day and night and constant inquiry how I should be more holy and live more holily and more becoming a child of God and a disciple of Christ." True enough, the New York period had been a time of spiritual ecstasy for him, a veritable mountaintop. Edwards put these thoughts and other reflections together in a document that would become known as his personal narrative. This is one of the most important extant documents regarding Edwards' own mature spiritual introspection. His own son-in-law, Aaron Burr Sr., had asked him to share more deeply about his soul's growth over the years. In a key statement regarding his spiritual ecstasies during his period of time in New York City, Edwards makes a significant admission about the time in which the resolutions were drafted. Listen carefully for the way Edwards acknowledges some imbalance in his spiritual life. "I sought an increase of grace and holiness, that I might live an holy life with vastly more earnestness than ever I sought grace before I had it. I used to be continually examining myself and studying and contriving for likely ways and means how I should live holily with far greater diligence and earnestness than ever I pursued anything in my life, but with too great a dependence on my own strength, which afterwards proved a great damage to me. My experience had not then taught me, as it has done since, my extreme feebleness and impotence. Every manner of way and the innumerable and bottomless depths of the secret corruption and deceit that were there was in my heart. However, I went on with my eager pursuit after more holiness and sweet conformity to Christ." In these crucial words, Edwards looks back fondly on the spiritual fervor that he had as a young man. He does not regret the resolutions, nor does he recant any of their lofty spiritual aims. As such, the resolutions were well-founded. At the same time, maturity as a husband, father, and pastor was just as necessary to his soul's growth. He was enabled to see his own heart over a longer period of time than the resolutions allowed him. He recognized that zealous resolve necessarily needs to be balanced by a relentless reliance on God's ever-patient grace. That lesson would be learned over an extended trajectory of service, suffering, and daily reliance upon God's goodness for us in Jesus Christ. Growth, we might say, is better tracked over decades and years than weeks and days. He had learned experientially an incomparable lesson about sanctification. Jonathan Edwards needed more than his 70 resolutions for Christ. He needed Christ himself. Well, thanks for checking into this video. Again, this was from my recent article on Desiring God. The title of the article was 300 Years of Holy Resolve, the Enduring Resolutions of Jonathan Edwards. And don't forget, if you're interested in a copy of my book, Holy Living, Jonathan Edwards' 70 Resolutions for the Christian Life, 2 opportunities to get a free one. One, just by commenting on this video, Make sure to reply if I reply to you to get your address all set up, and another opportunity on my Instagram account as well. Thanks for checking in. Do love you lots, and we will talk to you later.